Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Hi there, welcome to the podcast. In this episode, I'm going to go through some shorter questions that have been raised by members of my community. Those members actually get an opportunity to join me for about 90 minutes once a week, where they can raise any question relating to the delivery of their projects. Some of those questions are actually quite long and quite detailed and would take me almost a whole podcast episode to cover off. But some of them are quite short and succinct, and it's some of those shorter ones that I'm going to go through in this episode, with a view that if they helped other members of my community, the likelihood is that there's content here that will help you deliver your project better or help you get better clarity around the whole process of managing your next project. So let's get on with these questions. The first question says, would you still use a schedule of works for a discrete one-off job, such as replacing all the doors in a property with fire doors? So we've got smaller projects. This is quite a small project, just a little, it's described as a discrete one. I'm not sure that's quite the word I'd use, but it's a small project to replace doors. Perhaps this is an HMO, so there could be 6, 7, 8 doors or so to replace with fire doors. And the short answer to the question, I will go into more depth, of course, but the short answer to the question is yes, I would still use a schedule of works. My belief is that actually any project you do, even smaller than replacing fire doors, still needs some kind of schedule of works. And the schedule of works, the size of the schedule of works reflects the size of the project. If we're refurbishing a whole property, then expect the schedule of works to be 8, 10, 12 pages of a Word document. If we've got a small project like this, expect it to perhaps be 5, 6, 7 lines of perhaps an email or something like that. But even though this is a small project, there still is a demand on us to specify what we want. First of all, so that we've got clarity. So just by thinking it through, we've got clarity about what we actually need. But secondly, to demonstrate to the people that are going to price this work that we know what we want, and therefore they can price and deliver what we want. And of course, that leads to the credibility that we want to demonstrate to our contractors that we are going to be a good client to work with. So in this particular example, we're replacing some fire doors. Well, the first thing is, what style of fire door do you actually want? There are probably, I'm guessing, 15, 20 different styles of doors you could come across, of different patterns, different combinations of patterns on those doors. We can get those in styles ready for painting. We can actually buy them in pre-primed, although that is very similar, of course. We can also buy them pre-finished, so they don't actually need anything doing to them once they've been hung. So we need to choose which kind of door we need. Now, we're replacing like for like, so we're taking out existing doors and putting new doors in. Do we want those doors to be hung on new hinges, or are we happy that all of the old hinges are perfectly okay? Do we want to take the opportunity of changing the style of those hinges? Perhaps they're tatty painted ones at the moment. and we want to replace them with bright, shiny, polished chrome, if that's the style of our property. What are we going to do about all of the ironmongery on the existing doors? Do we want the existing handles to be moved over, or do we want to change the style on those? Likewise, with overhead door closers, you may have numbers on the doors if these are bedroom doors. And then what about the locks? If you've got tenants living in this property, how are you going to manage the switch over of the locking mechanism? Do you want the existing locking mechanism to go back into the new doors, or are you going to manage a handover whereby each tenant gets a new key after the doors have been changed over? So we've got a basic description here that becomes a basic schedule of works. Replace the doors, buy this pattern from this supplier, reuse the existing hinges where possible, but replace the handles with this style of handle and the overhead closer and this style of number, and then retain the existing locking system into the new doors, and then perhaps allow to prepare and paint the doors as as necessary on completion. You could even specify the color that you want them painted if that's the case. Now, that might only be quite a short schedule of works, but that is clarity that will help you and help builders, or help, perhaps in this case, a carpenter, understand exactly what you want doing. And it eliminates questions. By eliminating questions, you've got your time back. The builders will see you as credible, and they'll get on and deliver the price for you. Now, you might put into that same document some provision around security. You might say how you want to manage it in an occupied building. You might put something in there about where the doors can be stored whilst they're before they're being fitted. Perhaps there's a shed in the back garden, maybe there's a basement, maybe there's a spare bedroom, or something like that. So you can add other bits and pieces into the schedule of works to give the builders every opportunity to deliver the project effectively. But ultimately, you still need to write something down. There is still a need for a schedule of works for these small projects. The common small projects that I end up getting involved with is actually the churn, the work between the changeover of tenants in HMO bedrooms. So we've got one bedroom, a tenant has moved out, and we've got some repairs to do. Maybe we've got some repairs that have been paused as a result of the tenant misusing the room. They've got some divots in the wall. They've burnt the carpet. They've scratched the windowsill. So there could be some work related to that. Or maybe we've just decided, look, actually, that tenant's lived in that room there for the last 6 years. It really is time it had a refresh. And there's a specification for repainting the walls, ceilings, woodwork, etc., including colours. And again, there's another small project. We can still write the schedule of works down as to exactly what we want to get carried out. Now, most of the time, I'm getting that kind of work done by a handyman. A lot of the time, it is the same person. But even though that person knows a lot about my properties, I still want to write down everything that I want them to do. There may be some things that might look like it needs doing in the room, but for some reason, I decide not to spend the money on that. There may be some things where if I can give him the information in advance, I'm not going to get a phone call later on. Like, what colour do you want the walls painted? If I've told him in the schedule of works that I want the wall colour to be, commonly at the moment, I'm using apricot white. If I tell him that, I know I'm not going to get a phone call partway through the project. So the answer to the question is there should always be a schedule of works. Even if it's a tiny little thing, there is something needed to get some clarity. Does it need to be a separate document when we're talking about these small projects? Absolutely not. It may be nothing more than 5 or 6 lines in an email that makes it nice and clear what you want doing. But of course, it could end up being a separate piece of paper, separate document, depending on the size it actually gets to once you've got it all written out. And maybe you might need to include some photos, or perhaps you need to put a floor plan in there just so that there's clarity as to exactly which room you're talking about, or which doors are relevant. Maybe it's not every single door that needs to be replaced. It's only, say, the bedroom doors and perhaps the kitchen door. So you might mark that up on a floor plan. So you might have some additional information. Whatever it needs to ensure that the builder can deliver and will deliver as quickly and as quietly almost as possible. Now, this question went on actually and had another little bit tagged into it, which is, would you have a contract with the builder that you engage? So and again, there is a simple answer to it. I'm not going to go straight to the simple answer in this respect, because that might just mean that you're taking that answer as gospel. So I want to just explain a little bit more here. Would you have a contract? A contract is some kind of agreement between the two parties, you as the building owner and the builder, the carpenter that's going to do the work here. Would you have some kind of agreement between you? It doesn't have to be a separate bit of paper. It could, again, all be done by email. It doesn't have to be signed, but there needs to be something between you that agrees that the builder has made an offer to replace these doors, let's say for a nice simple figure, £1,000, and you have agreed that when the doors have been replaced to the standard that you've specified in your schedule of works, you are going to pay the builder £1,000. So that is effectively a contract. It doesn't have to be anything formal. You certainly don't want to be in the realms of downloading long, complicated contracts from the internet for this. It is probably nothing more than just a simple exchange of emails between you and the builder, confirming anything that you think needs confirming. Now, the type of things that might need confirming could be that you actually want clarity as to who the builder is. Is the builder Bob the Builder? Is it Bob the Builder and Sons, or is it Bob the Builder and Sons Limited? If you've got clarity, then you know who you're working with and what entity you're working with. On a smaller project, perhaps a little bit less important. But if you've got that mindset of having clarity every single time, that's no bad thing. As far as other information to establish, you want to make sure that the builder knows who they are working with. It's you, yes, but in what capacity is it you? And ultimately, that normally comes back to who is the owner of the property. It possibly isn't you. It's possibly more likely your property investment business, however you've got that set up. So, and telling the builder that it is your investment business that you engage in them, and this is the name of the investment business, and this is the trading address, means that they now know who to make the invoice out to. And that's no bad thing for a builder to know that. That is peace of mind that before they've started, they know how they're going to get paid. If that invoice has got to go to a specific party, or if that invoice needs to come in at a certain time in the day, or more likely in the week, or perhaps even the month, then let them know. I tell all of my builders that to get paid, if they submit an invoice by Monday evening, they will be paid by Friday. Invariably, they'll be paid quicker than Friday, but they'll be paid by Friday. If they submit an invoice on a Tuesday, it will wait till the following Monday before they get paid the following Friday. So for them to speed through, my system and the way it works in my business is invoices in by Monday evening, payment by Friday. So if that's important to you, make sure you tell the builder. Make sure you agree the parameters of the of that payment. Is the builder going to finish all of the work before they get paid, or do they get paid every time they've managed to hang a door, and how much might that be? Or are you going to pay them a little bit more ad hoc on some kind of other arrangement? Whatever you want to do, how are you going to ensure they get paid? Is there any kind of guarantee or warranty? What happens if something doesn't work? Is the builder going to come back and maintain it? Now, something like hanging some fire doors, maybe that's only 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks or so. After that, if those doors are fine, they're in 4 weeks, they're probably fine for a longer term. But if you've agreed anything like that, then all of that can be in this I don't want to say document, but within something that agrees that you are working with this other builder. Ultimately, from a legal perspective, from a contractual perspective, we are reliant here upon basic, simple, annotated and set out for years British contract law, or contract law in your country if it sometimes isn't quite the same. So you will fall under your basic contract law. Effectively, for those that don't know much about contracts, one party has to make an offer. So your builder has offered to hang these doors for £1,000. You have to accept, and you're very much you sending an email back that says, yes, I accept your quote, start next Monday, this is how you collect the keys. That's the acceptance. And you can, and it would be worthwhile, agree in any salient terms at that point. Neither party needs to sign. If there's an offer and an acceptance and the builder then starts, that is deemed the contract is in place. So don't worry about anything super formal. Just make sure that there's an offer, there's an acceptance, and some basic or some agreement of basic terms where those are appropriate. Don't get too hung up beyond that. And in reality, although there's more terms that you might want to go into here, in reality, you don't need anything more complex for a bigger contract. There's definitely more terms to cover off, as I say. And as we go into even bigger projects, we want kind of conditions as well in there, terms and conditions, to kind of make sure that various other scenarios are covered. But even with our smallest projects, like replacing some doors with some fire doors, yes, we still want a schedule of works, and yes, we still want some kind of contract, some kind of agreement between the parties to make sure that it's all actually going to happen properly. Just jumping in to make sure that you've got everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you'll have heard me talk about other property investors that I'm currently working with or have worked with in the past. And so I wanted to ensure that you can find out how you can actually work with me. And the best place to start with that is my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. On there, you'll find details of training courses that I run. You'll find details about my community, and also how you can work with me on a one-to-one basis when you are progressed far enough down the line. And then if you're not really sure what's right for you and how we can work together, then there's a button at the top. Just hit the button at the top that says book a call. It's absolutely free. It will take you to my diary, find a slot, and we'll be able to talk in the next couple of weeks. Remember, the website is refurbishmentmastery.com. I really look forward to helping you with a successful delivery of all of your projects. Now back to the podcast. So that's the second question for today. Two more I'm going to cover off today. The next one is, do you contact local building control officers or independent companies to advise on fire and soundproof separating for splitting the property into flats at an initial stage of the project. Now, this is an interesting question because I know from talking to a lot of property investors that this is a very common question that comes up in their minds. But I'm actually going to answer the question by saying, actually, none of the above. The process set out here is not really the right process. So if you're thinking that this was a question that is right for you, let me help you understand why it's not quite the right process. Let me just read the question again so that you understand where we're starting from, and then I'll explain why it's not quite the right process. So the question says, do you contact local building control officers or independent companies? So which ones should I contact, local building control or an independent company, to advise on fire and sound separation for splitting a property into flats at the initial stage of a project? So when you are initially considering at high level that you want to split a property into separate flats, you don't need to know the technicalities about how you're going to do that. So from a building control perspective, you don't need to know what the regulations say at the initial stages, because really you need to be establishing how this building is going to split up into flats. And if you need any technical support at that stage, it should be from an architect or possibly a planning consultant from a high level perspective as to how might this building be split up. At that stage, there is no need to know about the building regulation or the detail of the building regulations. Now, if you're a little bit further advanced, and let's say the property has already got planning permission to be split into separate flats, then you personally still don't need to talk to building control in either capacity at that stage. At that stage, you need an architect to put together building regulation drawings, and they won't need to speak to building control about sound, the separation of fire and sound when splitting it into separate flats, because architects do this all of the time. So they know the requirements, they know the specification that they've got to put onto the drawings. So they've got no reason to talk to building control either. The first time someone needs to talk to building control, and my advice is that that is you, the first time you need to talk to building control is when you are ready to give them those drawings, or a week or two before you're ready to give them the drawings, so that you can obtain quotes, you can formally appoint them, and then when the drawings are available, you can send them the drawings. Now, if I go back to the question, would I use local building control or an independent company at that point? I generally use independent companies. I haven't used local authority building control now probably for 10 plus years or so. And even then, I was using a lot more independent ones than I was local authority. So most of the times I use independent. I find they're a little bit more helpful, although they're nowhere near as helpful as they used to be 5, 6 plus years ago, because the regulations under which they're operating have got so much more onerous and so much tighter. They're not able to, unfortunately, be quite as helpful as they were. You'll generally find that they are more available to come out. You'll generally find they're a little bit more on the ball, but that's not to say there's anything really wrong with your local building control officers. The local authority ones are, yeah, are generally pretty good in most areas, but if you're going to have problems, you're more likely to have a problem with them than the independent companies. So I tend to use independent companies. I've used there's multiple in my area. there's two that I regularly use in my real investment area. I tend to try and stay away from the bigger companies, although I have to say a lot of the smaller companies have now been swallowed up by the bigger companies. But so I was tending to use the smaller companies where I could, but really it doesn't really matter. Get quotes from them both. You'll find the difference in price is normally pretty negligible. So choose the one you think is right for you. But if we go back to the question that says, would I go to local authority or independent controls to get advice for splitting a property into flats at the initial stage? You do not need to know any of that. In fact, no one listening to this podcast really needs to fully understand building regulations. There's definitely things you will benefit from knowing, um, but you're going to almost have to learn that as you go through. Learn that from listening to what I'm talking about, being part of my community. Because if you try to read the building regulations, you would very, very quickly get bogged down in all sorts of projects and examples and case studies which are not even relevant for you. Because bear in mind that building regulations are written for every single kind of project that we could do in this country, not just residential projects, but commercial, industrial, yeah, all sorts of things, yeah, beyond anything we're ever getting involved with. So I would say leave the specification as far as building regulations goes to your architects and your consultants. By all means, appoint someone to act on your behalf and get involved at that point. Choose between the local authority building control officers or the independent companies. It's not a lot of difference really, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. And leave the technical stuff for other people to get involved with. And then the fourth and final question in today's episode. You'll recall all these short questions have come from members of my community that raise these kinds of questions and a lot more on a regular weekly basis. We meet for 90 minutes on Zoom, and I get asked questions like this all of the time, as well as much more in-depth questions to review budgets, to review schedules of works, to review contractors' quotes, to look at drawings and Rightmove plans and properties on Rightmove, and give advice on converting, refurbishing them, repairing things. And then we also talk about other things away from just straightforward refurbishment. We talk about longer term management of rental properties, ongoing maintenance of those properties, but even just general things about property investing and financing relating to property investing. So if any of that is of interest to you, then follow one of the links that will be in the show notes, and that will take you to a page where you can get some more details. And by all means, you're welcome to have a chat with me to see if joining my community, one of the levels, there's a couple of different levels there. So one of those levels, see which one is going to be right for you. Final question in today's episode says, I am doing a refurbishment of a 3-bedroom house. The consumer unit, so that's the electric distribution board, is old. So I plan to change to a new one. Is it worth rewiring the property at the same time? Again, this is another question that comes up quite a lot, and we do talk a lot about electric repairs, because the older the property is, and often goes with that is dilapidated and properties that are rife for refurbishment, the more likelihood is that the electrics are getting to a point where they're beyond the end of their life. Now, if the consumer unit in this property has one of the old-fashioned boards which had rewirable fuses in it, and if they're rewirable fuses, you normally see brown rectangular things that are about 3.5 to 4 centimeters high, maybe 2 centimeters wide, maybe a little bit smaller than that. They've normally got colored dots on them. If you see rewirable fuses, then there is no way you're going to be able to replace those with a modern distribution board without rewiring the whole property. The whole thing is way beyond salvage. And if you did try and replace it with a modern distribution board, the key thing you'll know with the modern distribution boards is they've got micro trip switches. So any kind of tiny little problem will trip the switch and kill the power from a safety perspective, of course. And what you'll find is that the old-fashioned wiring in an old property which has got rewirable fuses, there will be faults elsewhere in that wiring that will just immediately trip the switches the instant they get turned on. So there's no point in even trying to salvage any of the wiring at that point. So old rewirable fuses always allow for a complete rewire. If you've got an older board, an older unit, it really depends how old it is. We started putting the micro trip switches in. Well, when did we do that? In the 80s somewhere, those early ones. Now, the likelihood is that you won't have to rewire those if they've already got trip switches in them. But you will find that the older the installation, the more recommended improvements there will be to bring it up to the current standard. And if you had an electrical, in fact, I had an electrical installation put in a property just over 5 years ago, and I've just had it rechecked. And in that 5 year period, there were a number of elements where I had recommendations that I should consider some improvements. Nothing was critical, but within 5 years, there are now some recommendations. And of course, if your consumer unit is 20 years old, you could very easily have more recommendations than I had, but you could even have some failings at that point. If you've got quite an old system, the only surefire way of knowing what you've got to do would be to engage an electrician and get them to do you a full test and possibly certification so that you know exactly where you are with things. Now, unfortunately, some electricians will turn some things into a bit of a drama. So you do have to ask questions and dig a little bit deeper. But by and large, you will get good feedback from those electricians. I personally would, in this situation, probably budget to rewire the whole lot. So prepare for the worst, hope for the best, hope that I can pay an electrician 180 quid or so to go and do the test, and that it's not as bad as a complete rewire. Although I would, at the very best, be expecting to spend, £1,500, £2,000, depending on the size of the property, in doing some improvements, depending on the age of that property as well. So prepare for the worst, hope for the best. You won't have to rewire everything, but the older that board is, the more likelihood is there will be a need for a rewire, or you get to a point where the remedial works are just so enormous you might just as well rewire the whole circuits or the whole building. So do factor that into your budgets accordingly when you're viewing properties. Looking for the consumer unit when you go viewing a property becomes quite a high important thing to do. And sometimes they're not the easiest to find. Always start in the hallway. There is a chance it's going to be close to the front door in a cupboard or something like that, maybe at high level, but can also be at low level in older properties. Have a look in older properties, frequently between the chimney and the front wall in the living room. Again, sometimes in a cupboard, you could easily find it there. If there's a basement or a cellar, you might find it down at a lower level. You may well find it under the staircase. That's another good place to look. If you've got an attached garage, there's a chance it's out in the garage. So they're the common places you're going to find it. If you can't find it in any of those places, then it's probably hidden and it's going to be behind something. And if there's someone living in the property, you may not be able to move something. It's not obviously ideal to leave it behind something, but that's obviously what some people end up doing. So when you go viewing a property, do your best to find where the consumer unit is, because that will give you a good steer so that you know whether you're likely to have to rewire the whole property. So there we go. There's the questions in this episode. Hopefully there was something in there that you can take away and will help you make the right decision, help you manage your projects better next time round. If you've got any of these little quick fire questions, you're welcome to drop me over those questions, and I'll see if I can answer them, and I'll pick them up in future episodes of the podcast. Or, of course, as I say, you're welcome to take some more action and look at the benefits of being a member of my community and having access to me to not only ask your own questions like that every single week, but also hear everyone else's questions every single week and learn so much faster as a result of being in the community. So whatever works for you, I really enjoy speaking to you. Thank you very much for listening. I'll catch up with you on another episode very, very soon.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.